All right, welcome back. This is episode 3 of the turbo build. And just to recap really quick, what we're trying to do is taking my Mitsubishi Evo 5. I use it as a speed and engineering R&D and demo car. And we're going to upgrade to an Evo 9 turbo. I wanted to keep everything under $500. So it's kind of like an OEM plus budget build and just kind of take a used component, refresh it. We put new gaskets on, clean up some surface rust, and gave it a nice turbo blanket so it can stay warm at night. And then what we're doing this episode is we're going to wrap the downpipe. We're going to take the two turbos side by side on the bench and talk about some differences. And then we're going to get it in the car finally and go for a test drive and make sure everything works. After that, the next episode following is going to finally be the dyno. Let's see what these things will do side by side. But for now, let's get this turbo on the car. Let's do some more wrapping and let's go. Now we're going to take a look at these two turbos, and you can see side by side the size difference we're talking about here. So remember that flat part I was telling you about? Difference in size there? That's a great way to tell these apart. And also the serial number. So we look at the inlet here. That's, we'll call it just shy of 60 millimeters, so maybe like 58 millimeters. And that's over 65, about 67 mils. So also significant housing increase, but also significant inlet increase. Yeah. Teams. Four. Okay. Okay. Look for persuasion trick. So take 2 wrenches. I want to loosen it, so I want to be on this side. And what you do is take it, rotate it like that, and they have a much larger lever arm. See? Check that out. Much better. So now I loosen this. I can actually use a mechanical advantage versus relying on my strength. Really be nice to have a vice. Moved. Yeah, just free. Oh, this is cool. Here we go. This is a cool cat. We'll flip around the other turbo and show you. The twin scroll outlets on this one are really nice looking, actually. Yeah, what I liked about the Evo 5's turbo outlet for a twin scroll, obviously you have twin inlets onto the turbine wheel there. And what that one had is twin outlets. So it's kind of basically a divorced flow throughout, which is pretty cool. The Evo 9 turbo just had one big flapper. So I don't know. Sure, there's some really detailed fluid dynamics there to determine which one was better. All right, taking the old trusty wheel there, cleaning up that mating surface. Oh, looks pretty good. This surface was a little bit trickier. What was interesting was the gasket between the downpipe and the O2 actually marred up the middle surface. I think it was actually rusting into it or something along those lines, because you'll see even after all the flapping into it, and I even brought out the stainless steel brush here to clean up not only the threads but that surface some more, and still at the end you can actually see where that middle exhaust gasket was. Look at that. It's like etched into the surface. But, I mean, it still seals, still does the job. It's post-turbo, so it's not as crucial. But it definitely was sealing. The new gasket did its job. No problems whatsoever. So, clean up the workspace a little bit here. Always between, especially sanding, things like that. Rust. Nasty. All right. This is the attachment for the turbo blanket. Now, this turbo blanket had 2 pins that required safety wire across them. Taking that red tool there, what it does is it clips the 2 ends of your safety wire, and then as you pull that tool, the tool will spin. Watch this. That spin is spiraling that safety wire tight and creating a kind of nice connection between those 2 poles on that turbo blanket. Yo, what's up, Rocky? Taking my 10mm. Yeah, you get out of here. Now, there are some blankets that'll have springs. Springs are very easy to install, obviously. Clip it on one and clip it on the other, and boom, you're done. But the problem is springs will lose, their tension over time. As metal's in an environment like this, so hot, all these heat cycles, you'll actually end up changing and kind of like hardening the crystalline structure, changing the crystalline structure of a spring, and they'll lose tension over time. This safety wire won't. That's why you'll see this in a lot of aerospace and really risky applications. They'll be using safety wire and not springs. So yeah, go safety wire. That's what my recommendation would be. Okay. So now what we're going to do is some heat protection. We have our downpipe here, nice Philly built, really nice, good quality downpipe here. And then what you saw me doing just a second ago is I put the actual exhaust wrap in this bucket of water and just let it soak for a little bit. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. It makes it a bit more flexible as you're moving it around and wrapping it on the pipe. Just makes the job a little bit easier. And it also helps to kind of like keep the fraying and the dusting down. It's a fiberglass wrap, so it's going to have some fiberglass dusting. So definitely wear gloves. Respirator is probably not a bad idea. I might start with the respirator on and see how it comes out. A lot of times when you wet it, you don't have to worry so much about the dust. That's the whole point of wetting it. You don't get as much dust in the air. After that, one thing I have noticed in the past doing this is it would end up kind of starting to flake off and get fiberglass all over the back of the car and be really annoying. So what I started to do is actually coat it. DEI makes really nice coating for this. It's a high temp silicone. It goes over top the wrap. You can also use it, I think some people have used it underneath and then wrapped over and then silicone over, but I think it's a bit overkill. Yeah, my whole idea of this was really just to kind of protect it from fraying. So I'm just going to put this over top when I'm done. You might get a little overspray on the flanges or where you stop wrapping, but again, that's not as big of a deal. It's more about protection. So the next thing is this has a flex section here. So stay right here, that flex section. As the car moves around, the engine moves and flexes, and that's what that's there for, to kind of alleviate stress. Now, if I wrap over that, when this fiberglass wrap gets hot, it gets hard, and it actually kind of like solidifies onto the pipe, and well, it doesn't actually attach to the pipe. It gets a little bit more solidified, so it doesn't really take very well the vibrations or flexing back and forth. It'll just basically flake away. Just get into it. Keep rambling on here. Looks like the wrap is pretty well soaked at this point. Usually it bubbles for a while, and when it stops bubbling, it's usually a pretty good sign that it's thoroughly soaked. All right. So the reason for doing this again is similar to what we talked about with the wrap and turbo, and actually pretty much the exact same material. Our goal is to trap heat in the exhaust, in the turbo, in the exhaust, trap that thermal energy inside. That's going to translate to better response from turbo, maybe a little bit more power, but probably marginal there. But the biggest thing you're going to get is your engine bay is not going to be absolutely scorching hot. You're going to get that heat out of the engine bay. So, all right. This part is going to be fun. This is one of those things where it's kind of a pain. Yeah, no, so the idea will be to pull it as tight as possible as I'm pulling it, especially this first loop. Just kind of really muscling it on there. Just basically squeezing all the water out of that unit, but that's okay. Yeah, anyway. And you want to have, I like to go for like a 50% overlap. So that means that as I come around, half of my new wrap is going to be overlapped to the old wrap. And that's going to give me really good coverage on that. So here's a look at the wrap after I got that first little section done. And you can see it isn't the prettiest work I've ever done, but it'll do the job. You can see, especially on those like brackets here, and then that opening for the wideband O2. You can get a little rough, but for the most part, you're just trying to get it in place and cover the majority of it. These are stainless steel zip ties. Definitely need stainless steel zip ties. Don't try to use something else. They'll just melt off. And yeah, you just pretty much put them together. They have a special tool for this, but the other way to do it is just feed them through, get yourself some pointy nose pliers, and just pull with all your might. And then a pair of tin snips, cut them real nice in the end. Again, I don't want to wrap over in a flex section because that's pretty much a surefire way to get this stuff to fail, so I'm not going to do that. Again, the trick in the beginning is as tight as you can possibly get it. Now the thing is, before I can do the silicone spray, I just let this dry out. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to come back another day, but for you it'll be instant, and paint this. So as you're doing this, remember the wrapping, overlapping sections, and then this is here how I'm doing the zip ties. You can see I like to use a pointy nose, and I kind of just pull the zip tie through and roll it over using the pointy nose. That helps get it really tight, and then just hammer it down a little bit flat. I'm doing the last couple zip ties, and yeah, came out really, really well, nice and tight, and dried up nicely. I'm happy with that. Covered the majority of the hot parts of the pipe underneath the engine, and yeah, all these little fray things. We'll deal with that when it dries. Coat it silicone, but right now, gotta sit. And then here's a final look at what that downpipe looks like on the car. One thing I didn't show is this aluminum heat shield you see sitting over there. That was actually an afterthought. I was kind of thinking of different ways to protect this downpipe because the way it sits in the Evo, that forward-facing bend, is just open to getting all sorts of rock chips and road debris. And that'll really rip up the wrap and cause it to fray over time. So I took this aluminum kind of a corrugated material that's meant for heat shields, and I wrapped the sort of forward-facing portion of that downpipe, and then used some stainless steel zip ties to secure that. But overall, the downpipe holding it really, really well in some test drives, and staying together nicely with that extra shield in place. So highly recommend adding that. All right, well, let's wrap it up here and get this turbo on the car now.
Everything we did on this thing looks nice. It's great. I went ahead and got the factory O2 heat shield back on there, so it kind of hides my pretty thermal wrap under there. You can't really see it anymore, but ultimately it's going to be better, provides better heat protection. So that's what I'm going to go for. And yeah, I'll have the wrap and the heat shield. So extra heat protection here, really trapping that heat in there. So yeah, otherwise at this point, it's really just a matter of let's get it back in there, finally. I never like to try to tighten a bolt when there's a lot of weight on it. So this manifold, for example, the hanging turbo, for example, all that's putting a lot of pressure on that joint. So as I'm trying to tighten that nut and bolt together, what I'll end up with is I'm fighting, kind of lifting the weight of the turbo or the manifold if it's cocked slightly. And the reason why I don't like to do that is it puts a lot more pressure on the threads to do not only the tightening aspect, but then to actually lift this weight we're talking about here. So whenever I can avoid it, I like to unload the joint. So kind of I'm lifting up the turbo as I'm snugging up these bolts up until they're, just finger tight. It's plenty. But I'm just trying to unload that joint as I tighten it. Same thing with the manifold. I was trying to lift up the turbo and push it in a little bit as I tighten these nuts, just to kind of keep the threads from being damaged, because otherwise it's a great way to strip your threads. Okay, nice. See what's up. Sorry. I know what it is.
All right, and one more weird thing about this is when you're actually torquing the manifold onto the head, Mitsubishi has a different torquing procedure than you might expect. It's not normally the typical cross you might normally see. It's the two larger bolts on the left and right first, which you saw me just finish up that last one, and then it goes right across the top here. So these top four get torqued next, then the bottom four. So instead of kind of bouncing back and forth in a cross plane like you would with a lot of different torquing procedures, Mitsubishi actually has you going big bolts on the left and right first, then across the top four, and then across the bottom. So let's just go ahead and say Mitsubishi knows a little bit more about this than I do, so I'm just going to go ahead and follow their specs when torquing this on, especially noting that these bolts, or I should say studs, are notorious for stripping and giving all sorts of problems, and yeah, let's not do that. And then just last few things here, getting those lower bolts torqued, turbo bolts, and then the anti-lag system here, otherwise known as SAS, supplementary air system, that came on the JDM cars. Cool piece of rally tech on a factory car. It's pretty awesome. All that's for the group and homologation rules. And getting that new prototype turbo inlet on there, testing that in the car before I offer it, but it's going to be part of my new air induction system this year. And the new cleaned up Evo 9 bypass valve, getting that on place as well. Tightening up a couple of solenoids, getting some vacuum lines on there, and there we are. Everything's finished up, just got back from the test drive and worked great. So good news there. Turbo was healthy, made boost. Didn't really want to get on it too hard again because it needs to be tuned, but gave it a little bit of full throttle just to kind of touch on it, make sure it would build up to the correct, 25 pounds. Did it, worked great. Otherwise, really no leaks, nothing to be concerned of. That's the biggest thing you want to check for after the quick test drive. Another thing to note is when you first drive something after you've done a downpipe wrap or a turbo blanket or pretty much these fiberglass style wraps that go over hot parts, is it will smoke. And this thing definitely did. It was pouring smoke out of the hood vent. So I'm sure at a stoplight, people next to me probably thought, hey, that guy's car's on fire. But after that, and a bunch of stank that came out of that, yeah, looks great. So let's go ahead and go over everything that happened under the hood one more time. Overall, the install, not too bad. We had to chase some threads. We had to replace some studs. But, what are you going to expect when you're dealing with a car that's over 25 years old? But generally speaking, not too bad. Pretty easy access here on the Evos. 9 Turbo is going to be a really cool comparison because, as I mentioned, we haven't really changed anything else. So it'll be a really good benchmark. We're going to go back to the same tuner on the same dyno, and we're going to get it back to back almost with this turbo on the 9 here versus the old Evo 5 turbo, which is, again, still a pretty good turbo. It's the same one on the 8.5 here in the US, but the 4, 5, 6 had that big hot side. It's just the 9 turbo's got that much larger compressor side, that 16G6C. That made the difference there. So it'll be really cool to see. Everything I've read online says 20, 30-ish horsepower at the wheels should be gained, but one way to find out. Let's see what this thing can really do. So catch me in the next video when we strap this thing on the dyno and find out just the difference that it makes.